Hi, and welcome to Storyteller's Archive, place where your story gains voice. In this video, Hunting Season by Dr. Rockhard. Chapter 26. A Night with God. God could sense the anxiousness of the woman, traveling to where he was. He knew what she was going to probe him for, and didn't exactly have the time or patience for it. Regardless, he made his way back to camp, where Adira was found pacing restlessly. She clung to a piece of clothing, chewing on her fingers nervously, as her gaze drifted up to the beast. "Hey," she breathed out, attempting to control her nerves. "Where did you find these clothes? You said the food in this bag was from a family. Is that a lie?" God shook his head, not bothering to utter a word. Adira wanted to press for answers, but just couldn't. In fact, she was at the point of giving up entirely. Too much stress was building every day, and with someone as unpredictable as God, bad things were always bound to happen. Whatever happened to Devon surely wasn't good, and whatever was going on with the hanged bodies was surely linked to him. Surely. He was unreliable. What was she even doing there? She should have stayed with Jane and the others. At least it was safer. Adira silently slipped on the hoodie, making her way to the back, where she remembered a pair of joggers were. She jumped into them as well, and made sure the rest of the clothes were secure, before swinging the large item over her shoulder. By the looks of the meat she had left over the fire, it was all cooked and ready to consume. As she picked up the stick and held it out before her, God intervened.
"What are you doing?"
"I'm going on my own from here on out. I'm not going against our deal. As soon as I find them all, and you let them leave, I'm staying behind and ending it." Adira had made her choice. She would rather be dead than spend the rest of her miserable life with a violent beast. A deal was a deal, and she knew if she even tried to escape, God would do something wicked. Therefore she would fulfill her end. The others will go free, and she stays to die. God stayed silent, wavering from side to side, as if holding back what he wanted to say. He watched her every move, with utmost concentration, and only spoke again when she seemed ready to leave.
"I don't want you to go."
"Yeah, I know. You just want me around to be your little chew toy." Adira shook her head in disgust, only to be pulled back by a rough claw.
"I won't let you leave. You promised to stay with me tonight and do whatever I demanded."
Adira yanked her arm away, shaking her head with disappointment. "You know nothing about friendship, honesty, or love. You only care about yourself, God." God grabbed her once more, a little more roughly this time. The bag she was carrying fell to the floor, as well as the piece of meat she was saving for later. In an instant, the monster was on top of her, pinning her small wrists to the floor as she gasped in shock. They stayed like that for what seemed like ages, until Adira broke the silence with a timid yet angry voice. "What, you're going to eat me?" She struggled to move her arms, waiting fearfully for whatever was going to happen next. God felt his heart start to race, and his chest began to rise and fall rapidly. Adira could feel the creature's large hands begin to tremble and loosen, but was too confused on what the hell was happening to pull herself free. The dark being grunted slightly, quickly raising his hand to his neck, as if he was about to choke. Adira was now fearful about what was going on with God. It was like he was having a seizure of some sort, and momentarily lost control. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Adira slid away from him, standing up and hovering over the large beast that lay hunched over the floor. His long claws dragged across the dirt, leaving behind deep lines. Adira raised her brows in surprise, and was even more caught off guard when he turned his horned head and looked directly into her eyes.
You can't leave me, Adira. I'm begging you. It's not fair.
Her heart skipped a beat. Adira's hand quickly flew to her chest. She took a step back, with concern written all over her face, as she attempted to process what was going on. There was so much genuine pain in God's distorted voice, and despite how much distrust she had, why was she feeling strange? The woman swallowed hard, trembling as she patted her face in an attempt to wake herself up. God was now quiet, but emitting strange noises that could only be described as crying. Could a monster really cry? Adira slowly made her way over the god, resting her shivering hand on his shoulder. Her touch seemed to cause him to stop, and his tense body began to grow more relaxed. She thought that was the end of it all, and strange feelings that were happening between them were over. It wasn't until God stood back up on his two legs and faced her head on that she realized the both of them hadn't even reached the tip of the iceberg. Strange sensations took over her body, like she was under some deep spell that made her forget where she was or what was going on around her. All she could see was God, slipping off his jacket and tossing it aside. The fire beside them couldn't reflect his shadowy body, but Adira could still see it all in perfect detail. Before she knew it, he was directly in front of her, speaking words that faded into echoes in her mind. The world around them warped, and when he placed the palm of his hand against her cheek, it was like that time they first touched. Waves of electricity traveled through both their bodies, only to rest and build deep in their guts the closer they got.
There's no one else who can do this to me. No one who can make me forget what I am. No one but you.
Adira found herself nodding out of nowhere, causing God to bring his face closer to hers. She inhaled sharply, hesitating for a moment once reality came back, but it was only momentary. His long tongue traveled into her open mouth, causing her insides to turn into butter. She melted into his arms, forming into a puddle as he slowly laid her back down on the floor. "Why?" Adira whispered, trying to form her words when something hard and large rubbed against her crotch. "Why is this happening?" God couldn't even speak, as he slid his hand down to her waistline. He glanced down at his suffocated member, watching as it wiggled underneath his clothing and begging to dominate the woman. His red eyes peered up at her flushed face, only momentarily. She quickly looked away, but he climbed over her to get a better look. Lust and enchantment danced in her eyes when they made contact, letting him know she was just entranced as he was with her.
You're beautiful,
God whispered as he ran his long thumb over her lips, enjoying the way her body responded to his touch.
I choose you to be mine when I first saw you. Nothing can claim you. Nothing.
Adira cocked her head back, allowing his teeth to graze her neck as her eyes fluttered shut. She could feel him slipping his hand under her hoodie, gently digging into her skin with the tips of his nails. He stopped before he could reach her breasts.
Not yet.
Whispers entered her ears, lulling her unconscious. She could barely open her eyes, but through the slits she saw God standing over her, pulling his jacket back on and popping the collar.
Not yet, Adira.
The stern voice of God traveled inside her, sending chills of pleasure throughout her body.
There's more important things to focus on. Now rest.
And with that, Adira fell into a deep slumber. Chapter 27. Meeting the Beast. Jane loaded her rifle, swinging it behind her shoulder, while holding a backpack on her other hand. She had filled it with supplies like food, water, and other necessities one needed out in the forest. The old woman barely stepped one foot on the porch of her cabin before a concerned man stopped her from walking any further. "You need to stop, Jane. She's gone and you already have someone else you're looking for." It was Jax, worried out of his mind since Jane started looking for Adira. Everyone noticed she was gone when she didn't come out for a day. All her belongings were still inside, and the bathroom window was wide open. Some people thought she must have been kidnapped. After all, there was talk starting to go around of strange folk in the forest. Jane believed in the rumors of psychopaths running around and knew Adira must have gotten herself involved in something negative. Since her disappearance, Jane had been searching for her, hoping to find any trace of her son as well. Jax felt she was getting too involved. After all, it wasn't like Jane to be sticking her head out so much for a singular girl. True, she had her eye out for the group, but he felt the stress would be too much for her to handle. Not everyone can be saved, he had to remind her. You need to let go. Jane had zero emotion on her face as she patted the man's shoulder and walked past him. He merely sighed, allowing her to spend the rest of her day searching for someone he thought was a lost cause. But Jane was aware of something no one, not even Jax, knew. She was conscious of a shadow in the forest, stalking them from time to time. She even heard it rustling the campgrounds at night, after midnight, searching for a stray body to devour. It was why she had warned Adira not to go out too late. Now she feared the worst, and was sure the thing was involved somehow. Everything but the disappearance of everyone, all of it had to be linked to that one monstrosity. It was only a theory, but a very convincing one. The old woman took one glance back at the remaining campers behind her, knowing each one was bound to start talking about her once she left. She didn't care if they called her a crazy old woman. If they knew what she knew, she'd be the only sane one left. Jane readjusted her backpack on both shoulders, holding her rifle properly as she began her journey once more. She had already ruled out certain places, marking them off on a map she carried around. No sign or trace of Adira or her son was ever found. Now it was time to take a lesser-known path, and she made sure her weapon was loaded before charting into unknown territory. The floor almost swallowed her foot as she trudged over large puddles and tried her best to keep herself from sinking. Jane walked for only a few more minutes before an unsettling, thick fog began to descend upon her. Things had become eerily quiet, she thought, pausing and lifting her rifle slowly. The birds stopped chirping, the wind stopped blowing. The forest itself seemed to freeze all at once. It was almost as if everything but the woman was aware of a much larger predator around the area. Fearlessly, she narrowed her eyes and stayed still the second a certain familiar sound entered her ears. It came from behind her, heavy steps belonging to something that didn't want to be quiet. It wanted her to know it was there. Jane granted its wish and wheeled around, pointing the tip of the barrel at a tall, dark being. Its deer-like horns reached the heavens, and its deep, red eyes widened with bloodlust and amusement. God circled the woman, admiring her bravery as she continued pointing the weapon at him without a word. She ended up breaking the silence the second he took a step towards her. "Where's Adira? I take it you have something to do with her suddenly going missing." God stopped walking, caught off guard by the sudden question. He was momentarily quiet, until he figured it wouldn't hurt to try and respond.
"You won't understand me."
"I do," Jane answered, adjusting her grip on the rifle, without letting her guard down. God was surprised she could comprehend him, and it baffled him for a moment, before he returned to his usual self.
"That's a big gun for such a small woman. Do you really know how to use it?"
Jane scoffed as she aimed the rifle directly between his forehead. "Why don't we find out?" God couldn't help but let out a snicker. He was glad he pursued the old woman, for she was proving to be more than entertaining. The beast decided to test the limits and glanced at the rifle quickly, gesturing towards it.
"A Winchester, huh? You must be hunting something big."
Jane lowered her weapon slightly, her lips set in a firm line as she examined the horrifying creature. He was dressed like a hunter from head to toe, and seemingly had knowledge of hunting weaponry. Just what exactly was she talking to? "You know guns?" she questioned, trying to get more information out of God and figure out who she was dealing with. God lifted a finger to his non-existent mouth, as if trying to remember a long-forgotten memory. After a few seconds, he slowly nodded.
"Long ago, I had one. I believe it was a Model 70. all black. My...
He cut himself off, snarling suddenly, as he glared daggers at Jane.
Just what exactly are we doing here? And why are you asking for Adira?
She needs to go back home and leave this forest. We all do, Jane responded bluntly, examining how the beast twitched at the mention of them leaving. Someone said they saw something large dragging bodies around the forest. I take it it's you. And that you have to do with all these disappearances? God gave her a side glance as he looked around them for a moment, shrugging slightly.
I take credit for most of them, but there might be something else doing it.
Jane rested her rifle to her side, setting things straight with the monster. Let's get this over with then. I saw one of my people out in the blue the other day when I thought she had left for good. She was raving about the god of the forest, and how there's a whole colony of your believers hiding out here somewhere. I don't know how you brainwashed her, but Adira can't be a part of it.
I didn't brainwash that girl. After I scared her and Adira off, she got picked up by the leader of this crazy group of whores who worship me. They have a mind of their own.
But they answer to you, don't they? What of this other thing you say is causing people to go missing? God crossed his arms over his chest, shaking his head in mild annoyance. He didn't expect Jane to be so nonchalant and normal about him. It was infuriating not being able to relish in the fear and panic radiating from all who dared get in his way.
There might be something else mutilating you people out here that isn't exactly human. I don't know who or what it is, but I'm getting to the bottom of it. If you're so hell-bent on uncovering this cult, then go ask them what they're up to yourself.
He didn't expect her to agree with him, and grimaced once the old lady adjusted her supplies and gave a nod of approval. She didn't even show how weary she was from all this, and it took God a good amount of staring to get to the very bottom of her true emotions.
Don't you have a family to go to? Aren't you the slightest bit worried something could go wrong?
Jane gave God a false chuckle, rendering him silent. Yes, things can go wrong. I'm still doing it. She stepped out of a puddle she was sinking into, marching towards drier land. Behind her, God followed, with a very somber look about him.
Fine, I'll take you to them. We can even help each other out and hunt whoever is trying to take my place. But I have one condition.
The older woman gave a simple nod, awaiting the terms with a strict face. God immediately blocked her path, looking down at her face and making sure she heard every word.
Adira will stay. She and I made a deal that can't be broken. Nothing or no one can get in the way of it. Understood?
Jane didn't want to agree and was close to refusing when she realized there was no point in discussing it now. If anything, that issue would be dealt with after she was through with the cult, and whatever the creature claimed was killing more people. Once everything was over, God had to go, and Adira would be free. Just how, or if things wouldn't work out, she didn't know, however. For now, she just had to play along. Fine, was her final response to the beast, before he gave a very eerie, sharp-toothed grin, as if reading her mind.
I warn you, they're unpredictable.
God kept an eye on the human as he led the way.
You know what I always used to say? If you're doing something that terrifies you, it means you're doing something very brave.
I'm not afraid. Jane rolled her eyes slightly, still clutching her weapon. I still have my eye on you, but I agree. God wanted more than anything to get any type of emotion out of the woman. Seeing her stone, cold face was a little infuriating. If fear didn't work, perhaps flattery would.
A woman of wisdom. I want to properly introduce myself. My name is, well, people around here call me God.
Chapter 28. The Cult. God refused to walk any further once they reached the outside of a strange establishment. It was down the end of a small path, hidden over a series of small hills and completely invisible to wandering eyes. Only one aspect of their final destination stood out like a sore thumb: a tall black gate that seemingly guarded a very badly overrun cemetery. Jane could tell the gate had been opened recently, as leaves were pushed to the side by the entrance. She readjusted her rifle behind her shoulder and began to nudge the gate aside, only stopping when she noticed God slowly stepping backwards. What are you doing?
I'm not going in there.
God responded a little bitterly, glaring daggers at Jane as she opened her mouth to spew words he didn't want to hear. What? Are you afraid? It didn't take God more than a second to approach the old woman and stare her down. He growled loudly, crouching until his face was literally pressed against her own. She latched onto her rifle with one hand, turning away quickly.
I'm afraid of no one and nothing.
God purposely spat at her face.
You have no idea what these people are to me. Monsters.
He stepped away, snorting loudly as he yanked open the gate completely and shoved Jane inside. He slammed the entrance shut and watched as she managed to swing her weapon forward, quickly aiming it at him. That's far enough, beast, Jane warned, watching as the creature's red eyes grew larger. I'm on my own from here on out, and don't you dare hurt Adira. If you do...
Save it.
God cut her off.
You should be more worried about what's in there.
He lifted his head, glancing past her for a few seconds, before focusing back on Jane's face.
Ask them about the bodies in the trees and who's doing it. Don't listen to anything else they say.
Jane didn't respond as God roughly marched away, seemingly leaving her alone for good. Now that was sure she was safe from him, Jane fixed herself up and examined her surroundings, hoping to find a trail that would lead her to whatever these strange people were. The old cemetery beside her was damaged beyond repair, with ancient headstones barely peeking out from the green shrubs. Jane walked up to a rather large grave, pushing aside nature to see if she could make out what was carved on the stone. Some words were barely intelligible, but she could faintly make out a date, 1824. Jane raised an eyebrow, looking around in silent admiration. She loved old places, antiques, everything from the past. If Whispering Winds became safe once more in the future, she was sure to come back and explore the area. That is, if her son was ever found. With more pressing matters at hand, Jane stepped away from the graves and started to walk past them, down a barely visible path, heading into more trees. How the cult lived or where they were, she wasn't told. All God said was they hid themselves beyond the gate. Maybe if she kept walking, she would notice a small gathering or hideout of some sort. It didn't take very long for Jane to notice something was amiss along her journey. Everything was silent, save for the crunching of leaves underneath her shoes. It was an unnatural quiet, and when she stopped, she could almost feel a sort of unpleasant energy beginning to settle upon her. Yes, something was going on in Whispering Winds. She knew it when she first saw God. There was no way some dark magic wasn't at work there. In the midst of her thoughts, a somewhat calm yet eerie voice made her almost jump in surprise. It came from in front of her, and with it a pale, thin, tall woman descended from the fog. Jane thought it was a ghost, until she realized the woman was wearing a simple blue dress with what appeared to be a little purple flowers on it. She had her brown hair up in a tight bun and donned silver hoop earrings. If this was a ghost, Jane thought, then she wasn't a very good one. "Hello, may I inquire as to why you are here?" The unexpected guest spoke in such a soft tone of voice, Jane had to strain her ears a little to figure out what was being said. She lifted up her hands slightly, shoving her rifle behind her to show she wasn't going to do anything. "Hi, my name is Jane. I was sent here by God." At the mention of the beast, the young woman's eyes widened and her jaw fell open. She seemingly began to search around for the creature, eyes darting wildly here and there. "God, you say? Is he here?" "Not exactly." Jane grew slightly uncomfortable by the fanatic before her, realizing she had no choice but to change her plans if she wanted to get information from the cult. "He led me here because I want to join your group. I have heard of him, his stories as well as you. Indeed, he is very great." The woman's eyes focused on her, blue piercing eyes that almost seemed to break through her lies. Jane held her ground, however, and stared back. It seemed to work. "Jane, you have been blessed by God. My name is Annabel. Please join me and the others. You will have to meet with Mother Mary first, of course. Every new child must." Annabel turned her back to Jane, walking farther off, while the other trailed after her. "Mother Mary?" Jane questioned. "Is she the leader?" Annabel was silent as she glanced behind her, merely giving a small nod. "Yes, you will speak with Mother Mary in private before officially becoming one with God's people." The old woman gave a forced smile in return, attempting to act like she was excited, though it was the exact opposite. If she managed to somehow fool everyone into thinking she really wanted to join the cult, how would she escape? What would they even have her to do? And most importantly, who was this Mother Mary? There was an ominous feeling about the individual, and something told Jane she was about to stick her head in too deep.
You should be more worried about what's in there,
God had told her, and it was only when Jane and Annabel finally made it to their destination did the old woman realize what he had meant. Thank you for listening to Hunting Season by Dr. Rockhard. If you have enjoyed the story, please leave a thumbs up as it helps to grow the channel.